Okay, some other top headlines of the day. One coming out of Memphis, Tennessee. President Trump adding Memphis to the list of cities that he's discussed the possibility of sending National Guard troops to. Fox's Caroline Shively with more.
President Trump announced Friday he's sending National Guard troops to Memphis to fight crime.
We're going to fix that just like we did Washington.
Unlike Chicago, long rumored to be the next deployment location, Trump says Tennessee officials support the move.
The mayor is happy. He's a Democrat mayor.
Ahead of the announcement, Memphis Mayor Paul Young said he'd work to ensure any state and federal help would build on the city's progress. But on Friday, Shelby County Mayor Lee Harris said he's exploring whether the county can legally block troops from coming to the city.
Military personnel in American cities do represent an occupation, and the biggest fear is we lose our democracy.
This week, the Memphis police reported overall crime is at a 25-year low and murder at a 6-year low. But that's coming off a year ranking Memphis as the most dangerous city in the U.S., according to 2024 FBI crime statistics, when the city's crime rate was almost 344% higher than the national average.
It is the elected officials that have supported soft on crime, leftist policies, defund the police. They're the ones that are saying, oh, no, there's no crime here. And of course, you talk with any citizen and they'll tell you differently.
The president has also mentioned New Orleans and Baltimore as cities where he may send troops next. In Washington, Caroline Shively, Fox News.
All right, retired Marine Intelligence Officer, national security analyst, and host of the Strat podcast, Hal Kempfer, still here with me. Hal, several Memphis leaders said that they welcome federal help, but they don't think that it needs to involve the military. What can the military do or add that local law enforcement perhaps can't?
Well, awesome. First off, they got numbers. They're extremely well organized. I hear all this stuff about, well, they're not trained to do law enforcement. But generally speaking, they're not doing law enforcement per se. They're backing up law enforcement. They're basically a force multiplier in terms of how they're used. Now, this will be an interesting deployment. This will be different. Now, if you look at Washington, D.C., that's the Federal District of Columbia. That is a federal district, completely separate from the other the states across the country. There is no governor. There is no sovereign state immunity or sovereign state status under the 10th and 11th Amendments. It is a federal district, completely different. So the National Guard there is always in federal status. So some of the rules about, that they can do this under the state authority, but they can't do it under federal authority, don't actually apply with the District of Columbia quite the same way, because it is a federal district and they're always in federal status. However, there is that law called the Posse Comitatus Act, which says you can't use federal troops for law enforcement. Not a big act, not a very well-written act. It was from 1878, not written because people were concerned about federal troops on the streets so much as there was the former Confederate states didn't like federal troops stopping them from doing things that they wanted to do to impose what we later called Jim Crow and some of the, more, or rather, sad period of history that ended the Reconstruction. So they got Posse Comitatus passed. So what does this mean? Well, this means that the governor's welcoming them in, as opposed to what you saw with Illinois. And the question is, under what status will they be there? Now, the president says he's sending them in. If he is sending them in under Title 10 status, regular federal military status, there are limitations of what they can do unless he imposes the Insurrection Act. I haven't heard any talk of doing that. It would be very similar to what you saw in Los Angeles. That would be more akin to what he could do. However, they could come in under state authority working for the governor. If they work for the governor, then they could actually be used for law enforcement. The governors do retain that right. Some states have laws against that, but generally speaking, under state active duty status, they could do that. Now, there is a gray zone. What has happened over the last 15 years is they have been letting the National Guard, started out small with a few exceptions, and it just kind of grew, that they could come in under what's called Title 32. That's active duty for training, but it's federal funding. And there's been a lot of legal discussion about this, which is if they're being paid by the federal government and are they actually under the federal rules? And what we've been doing is kind of keeping it sort of vague. We keep them under the same state chain of command that goes up to the governor. We don't change that chain of command and make it go to the president. But if they did, that could be where the president could authorize funding to send them in, but they would be under the governor's status, in which case they would be paid with federal money, but they would be doing things that they can only do in a state status. And I'm absolutely sure that whatever happens, somebody's going to challenge that, and it might bring that question all the way up to the Supreme Court and finally get resolution on that issue.
A live look at Memphis, Tennessee on this Friday evening. Hal, since we're talking about the idea of troops in American cities, I always have to ask you this question when we talk about this subject. Has the effort in D.C., for example, the troop deployment there, has it had the intended effect?
You know, it seems to have had an effect. Now, the question is cost effective. There's another law called the U.S. Economy Act. You know, is it an economical way to do it? Bringing in military units is usually the most expensive option out there. It's one of the reasons you saw the demobilization of the Guard troops in California. You can't keep them on forever because they're very expensive. In D.C., they have had a dramatic drop off of certainly homicides, which is really unprecedented. A lot of violent crime, and crime in general has had a significant drop off too. And you know, the question is it the troops that are stopping the crime, or is it the presence of the troops that are deterring the criminals and certainly gang members and others from doing violent acts? And I would say it's probably a bit of both. But certainly when you see you know, federal troops, or you see military troops armed patrolling your streets, and you're inclined to do something like a robbery or some you know, some other violent act or whatever, you're definitely deterred because you realize that you are seriously outgunned, outmanned, and probably undertrained for whatever can happen and come your way very quickly. So it has had an effect, but there is that question at what cost? And also there is a bigger political question. Do we really want our streets being patrolled by the military? That's something that we see in other countries. You know, many times countries where there's military coups that happen on occasion, and there is that feeling of uneasiness when you see federal troops deployed in these cities, because that's not the primary purpose of the military.
Al Kempfer is a national security analyst, retired Marine intelligence officer, and the host of the Strat podcast. You can listen to Strat anywhere podcasts are available. Hal, as always, good to see you. Talk to you tomorrow.
All right. See you tomorrow. Thank you, Austin.
You bet. All right. Before we head to a commercial break, I want to play one thing out for you. Shelby County is the county where the city of Memphis is. The mayor of Shelby County, speaking on this earlier today, he even mentions the idea of bringing litigation in response to this National Guard, this possible National Guard deployment. Here's the Shelby County mayor earlier today.
I've had no discussions with the president's office. I'm in regular communication with City Hall. And so I think I learned on a timeline that is pretty close to everyone. I think the first media reports were this week, and I think that is not too dissimilar from when I first heard that this was a real possibility. So I think that all Memphians are against seeing individuals, military fatigues, semi-automatic weapons, and armored vehicles on their streets. I don't think anybody feels comfortable with that. And so we're going to do everything we can to see if we can turn this thing around, like moments right now, to raise awareness. But also, I'm going to explore litigation. But when he says something, at least something as serious as this, it hurts all of us. Our city's reputation has already been dragged through the mud today as a result of his comments. No matter what happens from here.